Daniel here from GI Energy. Today I'm talking to you about the dangers of hiring an inexperienced solar installer. What I really mean by that is getting someone to install your solar system that isn't going to look after you properly during install or in the long term. This is a really difficult thing for a consumer to identify. The solar industry has been around in Australia now for quite some time compared to international markets. We've seen it go up and down and up and down in terms of volume. It's very volatile, so much so that it's earned the name the solar coaster. What that means is that lots of solar companies go out of business quite quickly and don't look after customers in the long term. So the first thing that I want to talk to you about is the pitfalls of choosing somebody that's not going to look after you long term, basically, is one of the dangers of hiring an inexperienced solar installer. The difficulty for you as a consumer is you might get 2 or 3 quotes, and on those quotes they might look like they're similar products, and it might look like one is much cheaper than the other, and it might be hard to quantify the differences between those costs, and you might be tempted just to go with the cheaper quote off the bat without doing a lot of research. That happens all the time. That's fine if you want to try and save a bit of money, and sometimes there is a really good quote that's cheaper. That's also okay, but you need to do the due diligence to make sure that you're going to be looked after properly. I'm going to give you some examples of what happens if you are caught out by a cheap quote that's cheap for the wrong reasons. Because of the solar coaster, lots of companies, as I said, go out of business in this industry, and when that happens, sometimes it's the consumer that has to pay. So an example of that is, I'm not going to name any names of course, but there was a company in Australia that was doing a lot of work in the solar industry, installing lots of solar systems for homeowners. They were installing a particular brand of inverter, again, that I won't name, and they did go out of business. And in the 3 months leading up to them going out of business, they were doing very cheap installs, obviously trying to generate cash flow for the company while they were struggling. To the consumer, that seemed good. It looked like a reputable company, they had reputable products, and they were installing them for really cheap. So, fast forward a few months, and that company did unfortunately go out of business, and the inverter manufacturer had a significant amount of warranty claims directly from the consumers that purchased those systems for that 3 or so month period before they went out of business. So this company was obviously going and installing the systems, installing the inverters, and then cutting corners, basically, for want of a better phrase, to do it as cheaply as possible to get some cash flow for the company. Now the problem with that is, as a purchaser, you might think, well, it doesn't matter, I've got a warranty with the inverter manufacturer, something goes wrong, if that company goes out of business, okay, I have to do a bit of legwork to do the warranty, no one's going to do it for me, but I'm still going to be covered. Unfortunately, on this occasion, because the installs were done incorrectly and to a poor standard, the warranties no longer stood. So these consumers were going to an inverter manufacturer asking for a warranty, and the inverter manufacturer was having to come back to them and say, I'm sorry, that warranty is not covered because this hasn't been done correctly with your install. Under those circumstances, those customers now unfortunately have to buy a new inverter with their own money, and also not just that, they have to pay for somebody to come out, remove the old one and put a new one in. You're talking easily a couple of $1,000s to do that. If it's a larger system, could be $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 to do that job. And unfortunately, those customers, because they purchased very cheap, they're now having to do it twice. So the reason I'm giving you that example in this video is just to let you know that it's not as simple as looking at a quote and saying, oh, these look the same, there's the same amount of panels, there's an inverter that's the same size. There's more to it than that, and it's a little bit more difficult to quantify. So I'm going to tell you a few pointers here of how to quantify that. Firstly, you should be dealing with somebody that's taken the time of day to talk to you properly about your solar design before sending you a quote. If somebody's just sending you a generic off-the-shelf quote without taking the time to consult with you properly, then they're probably not designing something for your needs. They're probably designing something that suits them because it's either quick, easy, or has good margin in for them. So the first step is that consultant, installer, salesperson, whoever it is you're speaking to, should be taking the time to go through your appliances, go through what you're using at home, design something properly for your needs, talk to you about different products, and then send you something comprehensive that's designed for you, not designed for them. Once they do send that to you, you should be getting some non-biased feedback about other quotes if you speak to them again. What I mean by that is if you come back to an installer or a salesperson or a consultant and say, I've got another quote, these panels seem really good. If somebody's saying to you over and over again, that's not great, that's terrible, those products are rubbish, here's what you need, you have to have this panel, you have to have this inverter, that's a bit of a red flag. The advice you should be getting is, look, those products are okay. Here's why I think they're okay. However, I've suggested this for this reason. If you like those, that's fine. You can have them and here's a price for them, but here's why I'm suggesting these. So you should be getting, it should be quite obvious if you're getting sincere advice at that stage and they're weighing up things in a non-biased way rather than a sales push. So that's a red flag. If someone's pushing something really hard, it usually means that they've got a warehouse full of that product. And it usually means that they have to sell that to you rather than giving you plenty of options. Secondly, you need to do your research and find out how long that company's been in business. Ask them for their public liability insurance and their professional indemnity insurance. Ask them for their ABN, do an ABN search. If they're telling you they've been in business for 10 years and the ABN search says 5, that's a red flag. If their insurance is not up to date or they're hesitant to send it to you, that's a red flag. So do your due diligence on the company. Secondly, I would also say have a look at their case studies in their history. If you can deal with a company that's got some significant runs on the board with large organisations, councils, governments, private companies that are a significant size, that's usually a good sign, because those companies, those councils, those governments will do a lot of due diligence, more than you're probably going to have the time and resources to do yourself. So if you've got someone that's got not just a couple of projects, but significant history over a decade plus, preferably, with these types of organisations, you can see that they're consistently performing at a high level, high enough to pass that test with those large organisations. So I guess the take home here is that comparing two quotes is not as easy as it may seem. They may look the same on paper, but unfortunately, if something's very, very cheap, there's usually a reason for it. And if you do buy too cheap, more often than not, you have to buy twice. So take a closer look, because there are times, like the example I gave you before, where your warranty is not going to be covered if it's not done properly. So if there's a company there that's doing something very, very cheap, it's usually a red flag. I would usually do a lot more research than that and find someone that's going to do a good job rather than a quick and cheap job.